Hello, ladies and gents. We're on the module A328. Block 4, How Our Empires Experience, page 460. Unit 20, Decolonisation in French Africa. For what the political scientist Adrien Fabel identifies in French debates since the 1980s as a mysterious reinvention of the Republic tradition, trumpeting the grand moments of modern French self definition and forgetting the rest. Many French people come to imagine the acceptance of decolonisation as a victory, celebrating the daring of de Gaulle, the decoloniser, or the signatories of the 1961 Manifesto of 121 in support of conscientious objection and against the Algerian War. Efforts in 1962 and since to exclude the minority of French people who continue to argue that Algeria was French from the realms of French and Republican memory or history help make such a story seem feasible. Only facets symbolised by the terrorist OAS, secret army organisation, a group led by deserters from the French military, which had enjoyed wide support among Algeria's roughly 1 million so-called Europeans, had opposed independence, or so many have been led to believe. Such amnesia encourages us to view divisions fabricated by recent historical events, France and the French, different from Algeria and the Algerians, as obvious. Understanding pre-missed in newly clear racial and ethnic differences proved the most secure harbour for French universalism in its stormy exit from the reassuring certainties that overseas empire had seemed to offer. For French officials from the 1830s until independence in 1962, Algerian Muslim was above all a legal rather than a religious category. In 1962, invocations of the Muslim origin gave way to descriptions of the North Africans or Algerians who could not be European or French. With no public debate, the French government made common sense understanding of racial or ethnic difference the basis of laws that denied most people from Algeria the right to remain French. In this revolutionary moment, political institutions and the law joined with, reinforced, and sometimes redefined other crucial definitions scientific, medical, bureaucratic, and cultural, for example, of who was French and how France should be governed, definitions in which race and ethnicity were already explicit. This is why, in studying the disappearance of France that included Algeria, my focus on political institutions and law is particularly telling. Understand the law and the formal politics first as specific modes of representation, which act to define the people each claims to regulate, represent, and govern as modes of representation. Law and formal politics also inform how such people relate to other people and to institutions. Second, in this book, I examine law and formal politics for the ways they discipline debates and people. I pay particular attention to how both rely on institutions to produce subjects who can be categorized through specific characteristics gender, sexuality, nationality, religion, and ethnicity, and to shape these objects, possibilities for acting. Attending to formal politics and the law also allows us to use investigations of imperialism to access the real importance of sameness and universality in post 1789 French politics and thinking. It was in these twin domains that modern France had maintained some semblance of colourblindness. In discussion of Algerian Muslims, that in Algeria, from the conquest on, or alongside other workers and soldiers from the colonies in the metropole during and after World War One, scholars have shown how racial thinking framed officials as well as other scientific, popular, and so forth understandings. Yet, as a number of these authors rightly note, despite the sometimes frequent appearance of racist affirmations and even the use of explicitly ethnic or racial categories in state documents, France never made these categories official, never gave them legal or codified definition. Out, brave. Get out. The French had remained most reticent towards scientific understandings of race-based distinctions and most attached universalist principles in precisely those areas where the law was implicated. French legislators after 1789 avoided placing racial classifications into law. Inspired by the goals and achievements of the French Revolution as democrats, socialists, writers, and politicians of the 19th century defined them as the Third Republic, institutionalizing them. French law and Republic ideology resisted embrace of racial categories. Such attempts of embodying French Revolution ideas, of course, were only part successful. Studies of French anti-Semitism offer the most insight into the phenomenon and its paradoxes. Yet, as a formulation of post-Vichy immigration policy illustrates, Republican commitment to keeping French law colourblind had real effects. The most influential French proponents of recognising ethnic and racial categories, demographic experts such as Georges Morkel and Albert Sauvé, wrote their official recommendations. They invoked science to affirm that group membership should determine suitability for immigration. The policy that French politicians confined, however, rejected such device and contained no difference between place of origin, race, or ethnicity in ways that surpassed theoretic. France's hegemonic political tradition and its laws, unlike those of other Western countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany, hewed the principles that explicitly avoided references to race and ethnicity. The French Republic remained confident in its capacity to turn even men perceived as belonging to different and less civilized races into French sports and the arts, assimilation, or at least colour blindness existed to the degree that least token individuals could succeed. In all these areas, the limited possibilities for access and success offered to people of colour were well in advance of any other predominantly white Western nation. It was in the era of representative politics that France was most successful in offering a semblance of racial equality to all of its citizens from the late 1920s through the first Vichy government. Men of colour regularly held cabinet level posts from 1944, when women were given the right to vote, until 1962. Every government included at least one man or woman of colour between 1949 and 1969. Gaston Manorville, a black man from French Guiana, was the president of Senate, the second highest state office between 1958 and July 1962. Algerian Muslims made up some 9.5% of the French parliament, roughly representatives of their numbers. Although the details of the history remain largely unstudied, these facts give some support to the description by certain scholars of a colourblind French model, which differs from what they identify as colour-conscious US, British, and German models. Yet, with the event of 1962, the history of relatively successful formal representation come to an end. This book explores the disappearance of an imperial state that attempted until its last months, although fitfully, to make real the principles of race, blind, equality, and republican universality that were rooted in the history of France after the 1789 revolution. France did this in order both to maintain control over Algeria's land and people and to reaffirm French self-understandings, after it had achieved military dominance over the armed rebellion, yet proved incapable of the undermining growing support for the Algerian revolution. The Fifth Republic still ignored the ideological arguments of those who did not want to be French or to be ruled by France. These efforts to avoid engaging with the challenges of Algerian nationalism continued until after Algerian independence. This silence allowed the foundation, as this book charts, of the now wholly European republic that emerged in the process of excluding Algerians from France and French history. The end of the empire in Algeria had another effect on the population of metropolitan France. The arrival of close to 1 million people leaving newly independent Algeria by the mid-1960s, 75% of the Pied Noirs, or 774,100 people, had fled from Algeria to metropolitan France. The French state provided financial assistance and other benefits to help them resettle in the metropole, and they referred to as repatriés, on account of their French citizenship, even though most had never lived in the metropolitan France. In addition, nearly 100,000 Algerians who had supported the French side during the war crossed the Mediterranean to settle in France, known as the Harkis. They were often the target of violence. In the aftermath of Algerian independence, historian Claire Eldridge have calculated that up to 75,000 of them were killed. And this has brutally convinced many to leave France, however, in contrast with the relatively welcome conditions found by Pied Noirs, Harkis, which were placed in camp of France, often behind barbed wire. While meant to be contemporary, by the early 1980s, an estimated 28,500 people were still living in such camps. This is Eldred, page 93. The legacies of the Algerian War thus endured for the decades after 1962. Throughout this section, we can explore the course of the Algerian War and how Algeria won independence in 1962. We can see how the French authorities attempted to maintain control of Algeria and how the crisis led to profound changes in metropolitan France as well as in Algeria. You explore international aspects of the Algerian War. Page 464. Successful decolonisation, the end of empire in French West Africa. We have learned about decolonisation in Algeria, which was an exceptionally brutal process. We can see about the decolonisation of neighbouring colony in Africa, namely French West Africa, colonial rule in French and West Africa. Looking at the unit of French colonisation of West Africa, accelerated in the 19th century, initially settlements and ports were established along the African coast. From the 1880s, much of the interior was explored and claimed by the French. 1895, the French brought together 8 colonies that they had established in the region to create the Federation of French West Africa. New Federation was the largest part of the entire French Empire. It was slightly larger than British India, although its population was significantly smaller. France's neighbouring colony territories in Central Africa were similarly brought together in a federation. French Equatorial Africa, with Brazzaville as its capital. Dakar, the capital of present-day Senegal, served as the capital of French West Africa from 1902 onwards. This is where the Governor-General of French Africa was based. While each of the constituent territories outlined had been governed. Within the Federation, special rights were reserved for the oldest colonial settlements in the present-day Senegal, known as the 4 communes, Dakar, St. Louis, Goury, and Rufisque. Indeed, the 4 communes represent perhaps the most successful example of the French approach of assimilation. These cities contain the largest number of European settlers among all the settlements in West Africa, and residents had far better access to French education and cultural than those elsewhere in the Federation. Moreover, as we have seen, residents of the four communes had the right to elect a member of parliament to the French National Assembly in Paris. 1914, Blaise Diagne was elected as a deputy representing the four communes, becoming the first black African to sit as an MP in Paris. In 1916, he convinced the National Assembly to adopt the Loi des Diagne, which granted full French citizenship to residents of the four communes and their descendants. The context of the First World War was decisive. These new French citizens were, like French citizens in the metropole, subject to compulsory military service. Indeed, roughly 200,000 soldiers from the four communes and the rest of French West Africa, known as the Trailers Senegalese. Senegalese riflemen served in the French military during the war, making an important contribution to the French war effort. In gathering here today, the representatives of all our branch of people of African origin and representing all nationalities of the Allies, we pay tribute to the country which is offering us the hospitality to host the Congress. Out! Get out. Get out and stay out. In gathering here today, representing the branch of people of African origin, representing nationalities of all allies, we pay tribute to the country which is offering us hospitality to host the Congress. It was a threat worthy of France's detachment demonstrated by its children overseas during the war. To examine what must be our future, that is, what must be in our future for black race in its entirety, without there being any questions of particularist conception nor any idea of independence, because, gentlemen, it is clear each of us coming here today remains guided by the most sincere loyalism to the nation to which we belong. The French remain French, British, American, Liberian, Portuguese, or Belgian. We want and we hope to those who have asked the task of remarking humanity at this very moment, and those who are endeavouring to organise nations must not forget to share the misfortune experienced by blacks, and they decide generously that they will guarantee with great emotion us against all that can prevent our physical, social and moral renewal. Page 468. We want, by means far more effective than past laws, than the African races be protected against the ravages of alcohol and of disease. We want that, wherever they find themselves, these races be treated not with a view to profiting from them, but with a view to the advantage of human solidarity that the war prevents us from ever forgetting. Finally, we want that no effort that might be loyally attempted to permit these races to raise themselves up to be stopped by reasoning justified by petty prejudice. Because these races are weak, unorganised, and often unaware, they need to be protected against arbitrariness or against all the theories that aim solely at their exploitation. Gentlemen, the liberty of our language emerges from the custom that we personally enjoy in France of full and genuine freedom of the opinion. Believe me that it would not be suitable for us, French Africans, who have already received from France all the advantages that we wish for our black brothers, whose development in other lands does not equal ours, to undervalue the benefits received and to bring any desire other than that to pay sincere and enthusiastic homage to our homeland. This homage is all the more affectionate and great because we have the personal, intimate conviction that it was so beneficial for all of us that France became, during the war, a great crossroads where all the races came together to find ourselves and where the common enemy truly brought into relief the idea of universal fraternity. It is appropriate that this benefit and France as its starting point, because it has always been the cradle of the most beautiful ideas. Among them, the liberty given to all blacks in 1848, a liberty that has at no moment been restricted or distorted to accommodate unacceptable social theories. Diang's attachment to France is understandable given his role as a deputy and minister of the French government, elected by Africans to represent them in a national assembly. Here is an example of a relatively successful assimilation of French colonial context, facilitated by the unique status of the four communes. Diang and the most other French African deputies in the decades that followed increasingly diverged from the path set out in a Pan-African Congress. While the latter increasingly pushed for independence, French African deputies instead pushed for greater rights, ultimately equality. Another universal Republican value for all Africans within the French Empire, the grant of full French citizenship to residents of Dakar and the other communes is significant. No other European empire of this time was allowed. Deputies from the African colonies to sit in the parliaments of the metropole, yet the citizenship granted to residents of the four communes contrasted the state of Africans across the rest of French West Africa. There, Africans are subject to the indignate, the legal code that allowed French colonial officials to punish Africans arbitrarily, and which affirmed their inferior legal status. The indignant was ultimately abolished in 1945, but French citizenship, as opposed to the state of subjects, remained a distant prospect for the most in French West Africa. Technically, individuals across the French Empire could earn French citizenship through assimilation, usually by completing a French-style education and sometimes a military service. Bear with me a second. Hello?
British Gas, we're going to look at your meter today.
Oh, yeah, I'm in. You outside, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll come down now. All right, mate.
Yeah, cheers.
All right, mate. Bye.